Hello, I am AbsolX and I come to you with an unusual kind of FNaF theory, although I suppose it's rather similar to my last two videos, where I come to you with information from something else I'm interested in this case, my former special interest Assassin's Creed, and present an argument for what you'd call a meta-theory about how I think it influenced the lore of FNaF. Don't worry, this video doesn't require you to have any pre-existing Assassin's Creed knowledge. I'll recap everything for you. Once I've demonstrated the strong similarities between the franchises, I'll go over what it seems we can actually draw from this and the framework and vocabulary I desperately want the fandom to borrow. I don't have any direct evidence of Scott having actually played Assassin's Creed. If I did, this wouldn't be a theory, it would be a fact. All I got is that it's a massively popular game franchise, and that Scott presumably plays other video games in his free time, and, of course, the uncanny similarities I will spend this video describing. Now, what does the historical figure murder simulator franchise have to do with FNaF? Well, every single Assassin's Creed game actually has an overarching frame narrative that takes place in the 21st century. The main historical gameplay is actually the character's genetic memories being experienced by a piece of technology called the Animus. The eternal war between the assassins who fight for freedom and justice, and the Templars who fight for order and tyranny, continues into the modern day. Currently, the Templars use a company known as Abstergo as a cover for their operations. The era of the franchise I'm positing heavily inspired Help Wanted and the Glitchtrap plotline in general is known as the Helix era, which went from 2013 to 2015. Those will be the main games I'm focusing on, and their age has the benefit that there's more time for Scott to have played them before coming up with the plot for Help Wanted. To understand the modern-day plot of those games, I need to recap the previous era of the franchise, which also has the benefit of letting me demonstrate what I don't consider a sufficient similarity. For the first 5 games, the player character is a man named Desmond Miles. In the first game, he has been kidnapped by the Templars and forced to relive the memories of his ancestor Altair ibn al-Ahad. He is actually the son of the assassin leader William Miles, and was raised in a compound, hidden away from society in Abstergo. When he was 16, he ran away from this life, only for his past to eventually catch up with him. In the next game, an assassin cell helps him escape Abstergo, and then he has to relive the genetic memories of Ezio Auditore to figure out the current location of an Apple of Eden, the main MacGuffin for the franchise. Over the course of the Desmond saga, we learn the background lore that underpins all the weird stuff going on in the franchise. Eons ago, a race of beings known as the Isu controlled Earth. Through their advanced technology, the remaining artifacts of which are known as pieces of Eden, they genetically modified humans to be their servants. Their names survive in human mythology as the names of gods. However, there were eventually enough hybrid Isu humans who were immune to the artifacts used to control them that a war broke out between the humans and the Isu. This war was ended suddenly by a catastrophic coronal mass ejection, which destroyed the advanced Isu civilization, leaving only a few members. But enough humans survived that they came to dominate the Earth. A number of Isu were sympathetic to the human cause and did their best to share their knowledge to kickstart the rebuilding of civilization. 2 of these, Minerva and Jupiter, created a device that could protect Earth from the next mass coronal ejection, scheduled for 2012. But Juno, another Isu that they had killed for wanting to continue Isu dominance over the humans, had uploaded her consciousness into this device, so that if it was ever used, she would be freed. Desmond and company eventually find the Grand Temple, the site of this device, and after Desmond receives all the exposition about Juno, decides that even though it will kill him, he will activate the temple to protect humanity from a second great disaster. There are superficial similarities between Desmond and Michael Afton's stories, but this isn't the part of FNaF I'm saying is inspired by AC. Both Desmond and Michael tried to run away from the drama of their families but couldn't escape, before eventually sacrificing themselves at the end of their era. But that's just typical reluctant protagonist stuff. Desmond's arc is realizing that he needs to sacrifice himself for the greater good of the entire planet, while FNaF doesn't really give narrative focus to the random people that are affected by the events of the series. Mike's arc, as best as we can tell from the great narrative distance, is about redemption for how he treated his brother. They both have terrible fathers named William, but William Miles and William Afton are completely different characters. William Miles is a terrible father because he's too focused on fighting an eternal war for the sake of humanity to raise his son. Afton is just a terrible father and an evil serial killer on top of that. Now, before I go into the Helix era, there are some more general inspirations I think FNaF is taking from Assassin's Creed, specifically about its metaphysics. In Revelations, Desmond is in a coma and is being guided through his further exploration of Ezio's memories by what seems to be the ghost of Clay Kazmarek, the Animus subject before Desmond, except he's not really a ghost. He's actually an AI reconstruction based on Clay's memories. He knows he isn't the real Clay, but he's still a sapient being who wants an actual body again. As he explains to Desmond with his final words,
"What is a man but the sum of his memories? We are the stories we live, the tales we tell ourselves."
This is the exact philosophical position FNaF takes. Within official material, Remnant has only been described as the psychic record of memories, rather than soul juice as the fandom often terms it. There's an argument to be made that we're never dealing with actual souls as we might think of them, simply echoes of memories just like Clay. And then we have characters like M1 and M2 who are exactly the same kind of being Clay is. They are AI reconstructions of dead people who are able to be perfect recreations of these dead people by using their specific franchise's way of recording memories as training data. And even when souls are brought up, like in the Fourth Closet, characters who are said to not have souls, like Charlie, are still fully sapient. She's just Henry's edited memories in his agony. But, because FNaF seems allergic to actually explaining things, the Fourth Closet never explores the question of Charlie's personhood on a philosophical level. But the funny thing about philosophy is that refusing to engage with it is also a position. By making Charlie's personhood something that isn't even open to debate, a theme emerges, which is essentially Clay's statement, that a person is just their memories. This kind of thing, where you have to look at a completely different video game franchise to find explanations that fit perfectly into the space left empty by the evidence, is exactly why I'm making this video. I promise I'm going to get to the meat of this video eventually, but before I do, I have one last uncanny similarity between the two franchises. While the Isu are technically native to Earth and just created humans as a second sapient species on the planet, everything about them draws heavily from conspiracy theories about ancient aliens. You know, the stuff about aliens having built the pyramids. All myths are actually about them, miracles are the result of their technology, they created humanity as a docile workforce, and the importance of alien-human hybrids. Basically, any kind of pseudo-archaeology, or just general conspiracy theories, are part of the lore in some fashion. Similarly, FNaF also uses pseudoscience as the inspiration for its underlying lore, in this case the concept of quantum mysticism. This is where the idea of the zero-point field being able to facilitate psychic powers and influence reality comes from. They're also both connected to Jungian psychology. In FNaF, it's through the myriad ways that the New Age movement and quantum mysticism are inspired by the concept. Its biggest influence on FNaF is the collective unconscious, which manifests in the series through the much more obvious and literal phenomenon of people being able to draw FNaF fan art before they've even seen the characters. This is the most likely mechanism for how the in-universe games are as accurate as they are. AC really only engaged heavily with the collective unconscious in the Last Descendants trilogy, and I'm trying to stick to the main games, which are far more popular than the tie-in novels. But the games do still allude to Jung. The Animus is named after the Jungian archetype that represents the subconscious masculine elements of a woman, where therapy involves accepting these and incorporating them into yourself. There doesn't really seem to be a reason to name the Animus specifically that, more just a general signpost of this genetic memory stuff should make you think about Jungian psychology. Whatever kind of setting genre FNaF and Assassin's Creed are, I guess you call it something like pseudo-science fiction, they're both in it, despite being completely different genres any other way you could slice it. Alright, we've finally made it to the Helix era. This era is characterized by a focus on Abstergo's new entertainment division. Just like in FNaF, the evil mega corporation is releasing video games based on the actual events of the series, edited to be propaganda. Games which are impossibly accurate because of the memory recording conceit of their series. But unlike FNaF, they are significantly clear about what's a game and what's real. The most relevant plot events occur in Black Flag, the first game of this era. In the modern day, you play an unnamed memory analyst, exploring the memories of Edward Kenway, primarily so Abstergo can make a video game out of it. You're approached by a co-worker in IT named John Standish. He's working with the assassins and recruits you to help smuggle information out of Abstergo. But he actually has his own motives. Remember Gino, the major antagonist from the Desmond era? Well, she has a husband named Atea, who, when he was dying, she implanted his memories into the genetic code of all of humanity. This means that periodically people named sages emerge, who have a ticking time bomb in their DNA, where they start to experience the memories of Atea, essentially turning them into reincarnations of him. After the events of the third game, Abstergo descended upon the temple and retrieved Desmond's body. That's actually how they got their hands on Edward Kenway's memories. He's not the player's ancestor, but Desmond's. This also introduced Juno, preserved as digital consciousness, into their network, just like how Glitchtrap, FNaF's previous era antagonist, got into the Fazbear Entertainment systems because they wanted to use relics of the previous era to help them make video games. Standish tries to upload Juno's consciousness into your body, but unlike with Vanny, she has yet to gather enough strength to be able to do so. For the rest of the Helix era, she exists as a ghost in the machine figure, periodically appearing while her worshippers gather power. This plotline never gets a proper resolution in the games, instead being wrapped up in a comic series, and as much as I like Uprising, I'm trying to just stick to the games. Now, the fact that Juno doesn't successfully possess you in Black Flag is a big difference between it and Help Wanted, but in Assassin's Creed, quote-unquote, possession from playing too much VR games is a constant concern for the characters. It's called the bleeding effect. If you use the Animus too much, you're at risk for hallucinations and confusing your ancestors' memories for your own. This eventually leads to your personality being replaced by that of your ancestor, which, yes, means it can essentially be used to bring someone back from the dead. Vanessa's emails about her personality changes and the tapes about Jeremy would fit perfectly into an Assassin's Creed game, and everyone reading those database entries would know that they're experiencing the bleeding effect, which I think is terminology the fandom should adopt, even if the exact details of the bleeding effect are going to be different. I've seen people struggle to explain what they think the deal with Vanessa's memories about her father is, trying to put into words that because of Glitchtrap's infection, Vanessa is having memories of one of the Afton kids, or William's memories, but she's casting herself as the kid, put into her head, which she is confusing for her own. It's not quite possession, but agony is being used to make her think she's an Afton kid, which is exactly what the bleeding effect refers to. While we play as Vanessa in Help Wanted, she's a much better analogy to John Standish than to the player character of Black Flag. Someone else's memories are taking over her mind, and she's working to infiltrate the evil corporation on behalf of the digital ghost of the previous era's antagonists. Help Wanted doesn't simply take the storyline of Black Flag and reskin it to be about animatronics instead of history. Rather, it takes story elements from the Helix era and the wider Assassin's Creed modern-day story, changes them to fit FNaF, and connects them in its own way. There are even more conceptual similarities between the Steel Wool era and AC. The whole reason we got an entire game for Secret of the Mimic is because we supposedly need to go back to the past to understand the story, which is the exact conceit of every single Assassin's Creed game. There's even the same general structure of the past teaching us about the dangerous MacGuffin people are still dealing with in the present. In Help Wanted 2, we switch between a virtual depiction of the past and its modern ruins, and in many of those minigames we seem to be playing through virtual depictions of someone's memories, albeit twisted. I also think the out-of-universe reason for the Help Wanted story increases the likelihood of it drawing heavily from another piece of media. As Scott has explained, the entire idea of the in-universe games that are similar to the games in our world was to provide a canon frame narrative to what would otherwise just be a minigame collection. It's essentially, in Magic the Gathering terms, a bottom-up story, where the gameplay ideas come first and a story has to be created to fit them. I don't know about you, but whenever I've had to come up with something to fit certain requirements, instead of starting with my own inspiration, I've drawn heavily from other stories I know, changing them to be my own, which is exactly what I'm proposing Scott did. The weirdest thing about Help Wanted is how it establishes FNaF exists in-universe. This has thrown a lot of players for a loop, but as I've mentioned earlier, Assassin's Creed does the exact same thing. And since AC is a franchise that actually explains things, the details are far less ambiguous. The concept is best shown in the highly underrated game Liberation. The frame narrative for this game is that you're playing a video game developed by Abstergo Entertainment and is released in-universe, but specifically a hacked copy. Abstergo has edited the protagonist's life to make it pro-Templar propaganda, and the player, both IRL and in fiction, has to complete side missions to see extra scenes depicting what Abstergo has edited out of the main story missions. While in Black Flag, the modern-day PC can discover messages between the executives discussing the suitability of the historical content in that game for release to the public, primarily more as an entertainment product for making money than as propaganda, making it extremely clear that while both sets of games use the same characters and iconography, they aren't exact replicas of the games that exist in our universe. Which is exactly what I'm saying happens with the in-universe FNaF games. The games we play aren't in-universe pieces of media. There's never been a point where Steelwool goes, "Oh, you thought XYZ was true, but that actually was propaganda. The truth is instead..." We're not seeing the kind of tropes you get when the real-world audience's record of what actually happened is mediated through something in-universe. I think if they pulled something like that, large parts of the fandom would revolt. Instead, exactly like the Assassin's Creed games, these games are very similar to our real records of what happened in the world because of some sort of field remnant thing. But there are going to be differences. We can't say exactly what, since the version we have access to is the VR adaptation, but I would put money on all the minigames being absent. Those have an actual narrative, not just using psychic powers to recreate environments and accurately design characters who don't officially exist. Additionally, they have lore, and the last thing Fazbear Entertainment wants is to create a combination of the real-world FNaF theorist community and true crime amateur investigators by actually putting lore in the games. This would explain the absence of the Golden Freddy and Shadow Freddy animatronic Easter eggs, and thus also be the cause for the redesign of Phantom Freddy. As for Glitchtrap having his corpseness turned down, that could go either way. The newspapers can't be seen in the VR version, and if they're missing from the indie games, the barely there lore of FNaF 1 is absent, which is exactly what Fazbear Entertainment would want. And it isn't the case of the, quote, rogue indie dev actually working for Fazbear Entertainment is from Tales, and thus not questionable. The dev working for Fazben is in the actual Help Wanted game. There's also the possibility that the virtual experience is more accurate than the indie game, as Silver Parasol used real animatronic pathfinding, but it's also possible that these circuit boards came in the same shipment as Steve's hard drive, which means that Steve could have also been dealing with Glitchtrap, and that's the cause of his madness, but it also helped make his games as accurate as they are. Post-Secret of the Mimic, based on what they did and didn't change from the Mimic stories, we can assume that the indie dev is named Steve Snodgrass, but he might not be dead and might have made more than 3 games, and while the general idea of he was driven crazy, which let him use supernatural methods to make the games as accurate as they are, likely still holds, there could be some big twist we have no idea about. Before I finish the video, I want to talk about some theories that work with this meta theory. The similarities between their conclusions and what actually happens in Assassin's Creed isn't evidence for those theories. Rather, if you already believe these theories, these similarities are evidence for my meta theory being true. First, let's start with God. If you're somehow watching this video without already knowing about it, the basic idea is that F10 somehow influenced the crying child to act like her dead son and is now doing the same thing to Greggory. As you might have already noticed from when I introduced the idea of sages, this is exactly what happens over millennia in AC. You have a feminine, divine-coded being who exists as digital consciousness trying to bring back her dead loved ones by repeatedly inserting his memories into different people over generations. This fits God David specifically, rather than just another David, because they both have the idea of a succession of these reincarnations. Said reincarnations often have Itea's heterochromia, albeit heterochromia with different colors than David. The emergence of sageness is often interpreted by its victims and society as madness. The conflicting memories can even cause sages to lose their minds, which is what happens to John Standish. Greggory's therapy tapes, especially the part where he gives an inaccurate recounting of his home life and seems to be talking to someone, fits really well with sageness specifically, instead of just the standard bleeding effect and identity substitution. And don't worry, if you're a Fate Fiona believer, where F10 is influencing the field to make things repeat, and only Greggory has David trying to take him over, there's still synergy. Minerva, another divine-coded figure, just like F10's son avatar, uses the Isu's advanced understanding of probability to arrange history so that Desmond would have the option to activate the Grand Temple, to the point where she can record a message to be viewed by Ezio with the knowledge that Desmond would also see it. There are clear differences. Minerva was more of a grand puppet master and arranged all of history to achieve her ultimate goal. while F10 is influencing reality and probability as it happens using the field, and most of it is just to fulfill her directive to mimic rather than her ultimate goal. But it's the same general idea. When Origins came out, it seemed like the modern-day story was going to explore what exactly the Isu's hyper-advanced computers and their latent precognition abilities actually meant. Given the kind of concepts the series likes to play with, as I discussed earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if the answer was supposed to be something drawn from quantum mysticism. They even used the term quantum probability measurements, and if Valhalla's modern-day story was better written, I might be ranting about how the field exists in both series. Now for a quick recap of the conclusions of this meta-theory, since I'd previously woven them into my evidence. First, that FNaF uses the rule that memories are what makes a person. That's what Remnant is, and souls might not even exist. This also means that when we have AI copying something using not just simple observation, but the psychically recorded memories of that subject, they are that person, or at least a version of them. But there isn't continuity of consciousness. This is most relevant when it comes to F10 and Glitchtrap, who seem to be the mimic program, believing themselves to be Fiona and William Afton respectively, which means whether they're really Fiona and William is a matter of philosophy, not lore. The Silver Eyes and Fazbear Fright seem to put forth the position that yes, they are, or at the very least that they're people. But this is a take you can disagree with, especially since it's not been put forth as a theme with much intentionality. Next, if Help Wanted really was inspired by Assassin's Creed, the existence of the in-universe games likely works the same way as they do in Assassin's Creed. That means the non-VR games we actually play are accurate depictions of reality. The in-universe games have been changed for propaganda purposes, but they are as accurate as they are because Steve is inspired by the field in some fashion. Finally, I propose that we as a fandom should start using the term bleeding effect to describe when a character isn't quite possessed, but someone else's memories are entering their mind and changing their personality and sense of self, which is exactly what happens to Vanessa and Greggory. This is nice and all, but these are all explainers for stuff we already know. Do I have any big conclusions? Well, sort of. Another complication with using this meta-theory is that Scott might have had more story beats planned that were inspired by Assassin's Creed, but things changing behind the scenes post-security breach got rid of them. But if you'll hear me out, here's some additional tinfoil. Remember how Abstergo took Desmond's body from the Grand Temple and harvested his genetic memories? What if Phazant did the same thing to Mike's charred corpse? This would be a sub-theory of Remnant Plex, since it requires them to be doing Remnant research themselves. But if they found a way to mine Mike's corpse for memories, that could explain what the sister location characters and levels in the two Help Wanted games are based on, and where someone got the data to rebuild his living room in a pizzaplex from. Heck, maybe it's even the basis of the first 3 FNaF games as well, and that could be the big twist where the game's verse differs from Tales. That one I'm not too sure about. Since they lack a real story and are somewhat publicly documented, it could just be Steve taking inspiration from the field with no additional factors. But, post-Secret of the Mimic, this theory was complicated. See, if M1 is the AI that powers Hand Unit, which, mind you, is still just a supposition, Dispatch could still be a real guy and the source of an independently created voice bank, M1 also saw everything Mike did in Sister Location. We already know M1, or maybe just Glitchtrap, influenced the Help Wanted games. Whether she has seen Mike's room depends on if he brought Hand Unit home with him, and the Nightmare bedroom would be based on her son's own bedroom. However, Help Wanted 2 still has levels that seem to be virtual recreations of Mike repairing Helpy after he gets damaged during a Pizza Sim minigame. The first 8 levels don't just use FNaF 6 characters. The dialogue of the Carnival Nurse when you start each level establishes that they take place during FNaF 6. This would be something Hand Unit saw. The most possible involvement M1 could have in FNaF 6 is if the training tapes weren't pre-recorded. Their use in Help Wanted 2 could be either from Hand Unit or Mike's memories. But you wouldn't necessarily need to use a hyper-advanced AI consciousness to have an artificial-sounding text-to-speech program to use for voiceover, unlike how Hand Unit and SL is able to react what you do and thus requires some manner of artificial intelligence. And if Mike's eventual fate is so similar to Desmond, perhaps he's still out there, just not in the way people who think he survived assume. Still, full confession, this last section has just been predictions and what-ifs. While my earlier conclusions, especially about how the in-universe video games work, are things I'm rather confident about, all that stuff about memory mining was just me throwing things at the wall. I don't have any proposed mechanism or precedent for another continuity that you can even get memories from people's charred corpses in FNaF. That said, as crazy as this video has been, Thank you for letting me info dump about one of my former special interests and humoring my tinfoil connections between the two franchises. I'd love to hear what people think. This was the video I teased at the end of my Mimic video, and now I have no more video ideas. So you probably won't be getting any more vids from me for the rest of the summer. You'll just have to settle for my yapping in other people's comment sections and live chats, as well as me live streaming my playthrough of Security Breach while discussing law on mine and Theory Chum's channels. Absol out.